I know why you came here. You did not click on this story by accident, nor did you stumble into my shadow like a lost traveller. You came because you heard the name, the whispers, the rumours, the endless obscene legends, the Countess, the monster, the woman who bathed in youth and walked with the dead. You came for horror. You came for spectacle. You came to taste fear without paying the full price. Good. Then sit with me in the dark a little longer. Do not rush to judge me. Do not turn away when the candle burns low, because tonight I am the one who speaks. Not the priests, not the gossips, not the bored historians with ink on their fingers and dust in their lungs. Me. I am Elizabeth Bathory. And this is my confession. They call me many things. The Blood Countess, the Lady of Chejte, the Beast in Silk. Titles given by people who never looked me in the eye and survived long enough to understand what they saw there. You think you know my story. You think you know the corridors of my castle, the screams behind the walls, the stains that would not wash out no matter how hard the maid scrubbed. You think you know my hunger. You know nothing. What you have are fragments, scattered bones of a tale picked clean by centuries of gossip, monks writing by candlelight, soldiers drunk on cheap wine, servants whispering to each other in kitchens still warm from the fire. Every generation added another layer, another rumour, another delicious exaggeration, until I became less than a woman and more than a woman, something between myth and nightmare, convenient, entertaining, profitable. Yet beneath all that, there was a beating heart, mine. I was not born a legend. I was born a girl. Do you want to know where my story truly begins? Not in the courtroom where they locked me away, not in the chambers they sealed with stone, not even in the corridors where the air tasted of metal and secrets. My story begins with a mirror. I remember it more clearly than my cradle. It was tall, framed in carved dark wood, standing in a room that always smelled of cold stone and lavender oil. The glass was old, slightly warped, so that when I stood before it as a child, my reflection swam like something alive beneath still water. I must have been 8, perhaps 9. My governess had left me there for a moment, alone with my own face. I studied myself in that crooked glass, the pallor of my skin, the sharpness of my cheekbones, the dark, watchful eyes that seemed far older than the rest of me. I remember thinking, this is mine. This face is my kingdom, before anyone gives me a real one. Then I saw her, not in the room behind me, in the mirror. A woman, older than me, much older, with my eyes but framed by hair streaked with silver, a crease at the corner of her mouth, a tiredness that settled around her like dust. She was not actually there, of course. There was only me. But in that moment, my mind did something terrible, something irreversible. It showed me what it meant to fade. Youth, I realized, was not a permanent gift. It was a loan. And someone, somewhere, was counting the days until payment was due. In my world, you did not own land because you were virtuous. You owned it because your father's hands were red, and your grandfather's sword was quicker than your neighbour's prayers. We were nobles, yes, lordly, refined, educated, but do not be fooled by lace and Latin. Everything around us was bought with force, maintained with fear, secured with the quiet understanding that mercy was a luxury for people who could afford to lose. I grew up with lullabies about conquest, with bedtime stories about enemies nailed to gates, told like moral fables. Our priests spoke of heaven, But our banquets were held on floors still echoing with the steps of those we had crushed beneath our boots. I learned very early that the world was a predator, and every living thing was either teeth or meat. So tell me, in such a world, is the desire to never grow weak really so monstrous, or is it merely honest? You may imagine me as a child, running through sunny gardens, laughing among roses and fountains. There were gardens, yes, there were roses, there were fountains. But the roses had thorns sharper than any needle, and the fountains were fed by springs that had seen more prayers than gratitude. I did not run. I watched. I watched my father receive guests with a smile that never reached his eyes. I watched my mother dress herself in grief and dignity after each illness in the family, then fold those garments away as neatly as any silk shawl. I watched servants bend their backs, bow their heads, and never look up unless commanded. I watched soldiers drag in men who had defied us, saw them tremble, heard a certain sound when pride breaks inside a human chest. That sound stayed with me. You cannot see a world built on fear and expect its children to grow gentle. They did not raise me to be kind. They raised me to be untouchable. And to be untouchable, you must never show weakness. What is greater weakness in a world like that than the slow crumbling of the body that carries your name? The first time I felt truly vulnerable, I was not in battle. I was not facing an enemy prince or a rival noble. I was in that same cold room with the mirror. But now, I was 13. My body was changing. The world around me had begun to speak of me in terms of value, not as a person, but as a piece on a board. A good match, they said, an asset to any alliance, a beauty. That last word was spoken like a currency. My maids brushed my hair until it shone, pinched my cheeks to bring colour to my face, tied my corsets tighter to carve a figure out of childhood. I gazed at myself and thought, they love this form, this arrangement of flesh and symmetry and brightness. Not me. The thing draped in fabrics, the thing that would be traded for land, for troops, for influence. What happens when the shine fades? Do you think noble husbands are devout believers in loyalty? No, they are faithful only to opportunity. I had seen the wives they grew tired of. The way they disappeared into wings of the castle no one visited anymore. Once they were spoken of with admiration. Then those words changed. How she has aged. She was a beauty once. She is not what she used to be. As though a person's value could expire like fruit left too long in the sun. I made a vow in front of that warped mirror. I would never become someone's discarded commodity. I would never allow my face to become a cautionary tale about time. If the world prized youth, then I would have youth. If the world bowed to beauty, then I would be beautiful. Not for a season, not for a few years, for as long as I chose. That was the seed, not evil, not fanaticism, fear. And fear, when given enough power, never remains just fear. It becomes policy. You are waiting, I know, waiting for me to dive into the horrors you have heard about. The corridors, the chambers, the closed doors and the muffled sounds behind them. You are listening for screams. Maybe you want them. Do not lie. You came here for a certain kind of darkness. You wanted to feel unsafe while still sitting safely in your chair. You wanted to taste cruelty with no risk of choking on it. Do not worry. The deeper parts of my story will come, like rooms further down a hallway, one door at a time. But if you do not understand the hallway, the architecture, the foundation beneath the stones, you will misunderstand everything. I did not wake up one morning and decide to become a monster. I became one slowly, inch by inch, decision by decision, always choosing the option that made me feel less vulnerable, less at the mercy of others. That is how evil grows in civilized clothes, not with a roar, with a whisper. My marriage was not a love story. Do not look so surprised. That was not its purpose. I was brought, beautifully dressed and perfectly trained, to stand beside a man whose name carried weight like a sword. Miklos, Ferenc, husbands and warriors, depending which part of my life you point at. They were all the same species in the end, men who knew the taste of conquest, who saw the map of our lands as a game board. They rode off to war, to crush uprisings, to secure borders, to ensure that our banners still flew above the walls. And I? I remained. I remained in stone corridors that echoed with my heels, in rooms heavy with tapestries, in a household that required order, discipline, control. Do you know what you become when your husband is away and the house is yours? You become the law. My signature on a decree could be as final as any blade. My word could raise taxes, punish disobedience, rearrange lives. And in that power, I found something intoxicating. For the first time, I was not just the one traded, I was the one who dictated the terms of trade. Servants watched me as if I were a storm. Tenants spoke my name with a mixture of fear and reverence. Inside, behind the silk, behind the jewels and the careful smile, I was still that girl in front of the mirror, terrified of fading. Outside, I was the lady of the castle, and I could make the world around me bend. When you can bend the world, the temptation to bend people follows very quickly. Shall I confess something to you? It did not begin with pain. It began with curiosity. I noticed things. How some faces remained smooth while others hardened with time. How certain girls could work all day and still laugh at night, while others seemed dimmed, as if the flame inside had been turned down. I asked myself, what is it that makes one person seem so filled with life, while another looks already half returned to dust? If you strip away the stories and the superstition, my obsession was very simple. I wanted to understand vitality. What makes a body glow? What makes a presence sharp and magnetic? You will dress that obsession in whatever words comfort you. Cruelty, madness, sin. But at its root, it was the same hunger you see in men who spend fortunes chasing youth in any age. The difference is that my age gave me more brutal tools, and nobody told me no. Who would dare? I was the lady, the mistress of all they saw around them. If I wanted someone punished, they were punished. If I wanted someone rewarded, they were rewarded. If I wanted to test the limits of a human body, how far it could be pushed before the light in the eyes changed, who would stop me? Do you see now? The path to horror rarely begins with a scream. It begins with the absence of resistance. You may think, this is all justification. She is trying to excuse herself. Perhaps. Or perhaps I am doing something far more disturbing. Perhaps I am inviting you to recognize the line where ordinary fear becomes extraordinary harm. Because if you can see that line in me, you may start to see hints of it in yourself, and that is more frightening than any tale about a countess in a distant castle. You live in a time where youth is still worshipped, where faces are edited, filtered, reshaped to fit an ideal that changes every season. You live in a world where the fear of aging is sold back to you, wrapped in silk, bottled in glass, disguised as self-care. Do not tell me you are so different from me. I simply lived in an era where we did not pretend our desires were moral. We were honest in our brutality. You still hunger. You simply decorate your hunger with nicer words. I remember the first girl whose presence disturbed me. Not because she was disobedient, not because she spoke out of turn, because she was radiant. She moved through the castle with an ease that offended me, as if she did not understand that this place could crush her if it wished. Her laughter floated in the corridors like music, unaware of the weight of the walls around her. Her skin was the kind that painters try to capture and fail. Her eyes caught the light as though they held it inside, not borrowed from the world. When she passed, even my own husband's gaze lingered a little too long. Do you understand? I was not threatened by her sin. I was threatened by her existence. It was as if the mirror had stepped out of its frame and dared to stand beside me and compare. I should have ignored her. That would have been the wise thing. Instead, I watched. I watched how others reacted to her. I watched how men smiled more kindly, how other women hardened in silent resentment. I watched how quickly the balance of attention could tilt in favor of someone younger. It was a small thing, barely noticeable. But when you have lived your whole life calculating power, you notice. You feel the shift like a cold draft beneath a locked door. That is when something inside me, something quiet and calculating, whispered, "If youth can take from you, then youth is a thief." And what do we do with thieves in a world built on fear? Calm yourself. I am not going to describe to you what you came here secretly craving. You will not get that satisfaction from my lips. I will not feed your appetite for spectacle with details. I will not tell you how many, or how long, or in what sequence. Not because it did not happen, not because the rumors are entirely lies, but because focusing on those pieces would allow you to distance yourself from me. You would say, she is a monster. She is nothing like me. Her mind is alien, her choices unimaginable, comforting, safe. No, I would rather keep you close, uneasy, recognizing pieces of yourself in my reflection. So let me speak to you instead about the feeling behind it all. The feeling of standing in a room where everyone answers to you. The feeling of knowing that a single gesture, a single word, can raise someone up or destroy them. The way it makes the heart pound, not with compassion, with power, the intoxicating belief that for as long as others bend and break at your command, time itself must yield a little too. That is the true horror, more than any chamber or tool. Once you start believing your will can shape reality, you begin to forget that there are limits, even to you. The castle grew quieter over the years, in ways that are difficult to explain to those who never lived inside its bones. Servants changed, faces disappeared, new ones arrived, already uneasy, as if they had heard wind-carried stories from the villagers. Laughter became rarer. Steps became softer. Eyes rarely met mine. It did not bother me at first. Fear is efficient. Fear keeps people obedient. But fear also does something else. Something slower, like rot beneath polished floorboards. It isolates. Soon, the only voice in those halls that never contradicted me was my own. When you live long enough with only your own thoughts for company, when no one dares to say no, you stop questioning yourself. You begin to believe that whatever you do is justified simply because you are the one doing it. You may think, This is a story about cruelty. It is not. It is a story about what happens when fear, power, and vanity form a single, unbreakable circle. Fear tells you that you will fade. Vanity tells you that you must not. Power tells you that you do not have to. And together, they lead you down a corridor with many doors and no windows. You are standing with me now at the beginning of that corridor. The candles are still lit. The air is still breathable. You can still turn back. I did not. Of all the sins they wrote beside my name, that may be the only one I truly confess without qualification. Not that I was cruel, not that I was obsessive, not that I sought to grasp youth and hold it like contraband, but that at every junction, every warning, every whisper of hesitation in the back of my mind, I brushed it aside. I chose, again and again, to keep walking. You know how my story ends in the official version. They tell you that the king could no longer ignore the rumors, that the church could no longer tolerate the scandal, that noblemen who envied our holdings finally saw their chance to take what was ours. They tell you they stormed the castle, burst into my private rooms, found things that made them cross themselves and retch. They tell you I was judged, condemned, sealed away in my own fortress, bricked into a chamber with only a small opening for food, left to rot with my memories. They make it sound satisfying, almost poetic. The monster imprisoned, the beast chained, the wicked woman locked in the very walls she once commanded. Justice. How clean that sounds, how reassuring. But listen to my voice now. Does this sound like justice to you? Or does it sound like something else? A problem neatly contained. A story wrapped up with a bow so that those who remained could go on living without asking themselves how they allowed me to become what I became. It is easier, is it not, to call me inhuman than to admit that I am a product of the same soil, the same hunger, the same worship of youth and power that still rules your world today. You came here for fear. You came here for horror. The horror is not what I did behind doors you will never see. The true horror is how easy it is for a woman with enough fear, enough beauty, enough power to convince herself that the world exists to feed her reflection. Look into your own mirror tonight. Watch how long your gaze lingers. Watch the tiny, traitorous part of your mind that wonders what you would trade to stop time right there. A year of your life? 10? Someone else's? Do not answer quickly. Quick answers are lies. Stay with the question. Stay with me. I am not asking for your forgiveness. I do not need it. I am asking for something far more dangerous. Your understanding. Because once you understand me, once you truly see the path I walked, you will no longer be able to hide from the fact that the same corridor exists in your world too. You have only been taught to walk it more politely. Very well. You have tasted the surface of my truth. You have walked with me from the mirror of my childhood to the threshold of my legend. If you wish to go further, if you wish to descend with me into the deeper rooms, where the air grows colder and the walls remember every whispered plea, then stay. Do not look away. Do not lie to yourself about why you are still listening. You want to know how far I went. I will tell you. But remember this, I did not travel there alone. I walked with the blessing of a culture that worshipped youth, a church that turned its head until the scandal stained its reputation, and courts that feasted at my table for years before they decided I was an embarrassment. The monster you came to see tonight was not born in a vacuum. She was raised, adored, feared, used. Then, when it became convenient, she was caged. I am Elizabeth Bathory. The name they gave me is not a name I claim. I am not just a story told in dim corridors. I am the echo of your own hunger, dressed in an older costume. And I am not finished speaking. You may think that my story turned dark suddenly, that one night I crossed a threshold and never returned. But darkness rarely arrives with thunder. It begins as a shadow behind your thoughts, a suggestion, a whisper, a small seductive permission you give yourself in silence. It begins when power becomes a language you speak more fluently than compassion. When my husband rode away to war for the first time, the castle exhaled, long, slow, heavy. Men command with presence. Women of my rank command with absence. When my lord was home, I was an adornment. When he left, I became the law. The keys to the lower quarters were placed in my hand. The seal used for decrees was moved to my writing table. The steward bowed lower. The chamberlain spoke softer, and guards at the gate saluted with a new level of stiffness. With each gesture, each titled head, each slow, reverent, "My lady," something inside me straightened, something that had been curled in fear since childhood. Do you know what it feels like to go your whole life being molded, trained, prepared, and then finally, to be the one who shapes others? The taste of freedom is never sweeter than in the mouth of someone who was raised to be controlled. At first, I was gentle. Yes, you will not believe it, but I tried gentleness as one tries on a silk glove, an experiment, a novelty. I reduced attacks. I eased a punishment. I even dismissed a minor insult from a tenant who spoke rashly in the courtyard. And the castle responded. Servants smiled faintly. The steward relaxed his shoulders. The hallways seemed warmer. But power is a beast with an appetite. Feed it kindness, and soon it demands obedience. Feed it obedience, and soon it craves fear. Fear, after all, is the only currency that never devalues. It was not long before I began to understand which words caused people to straighten like arrows, and which tone made their eyes dart like frightened animals. I learned who trembled easily, who lied, who carried resentment in their posture like a stain. These observations were not cruelty. Not yet. They were strategy. A noblewoman's survival depends on reading the room better than any general reads a battlefield. One cold evening, as frost clung to the stone like thin veins of glass, I descended to the servant quarters unannounced. Gasps echoed. A pot clattered to the floor. Someone curtsied so quickly her knees struck the stone. I moved through the room slowly, letting their fear settle around me like perfume. At the center of the room stood the girl I had noticed before, the radiant one. She froze like a deer, hearing the bowstring pull tight. Her hair was braided simply, her dress rough, but she glowed. Some people shine from within, not because of beauty, but because life loves them more generously than others. I despised that. Not her, never her. I despised the unfairness of it. She bowed deeply. Countess Bathory, she whispered. The sound of my name in her voice was delicate, almost reverent. I reached out and touched her chin lightly, lifting her face to mine. Her eyes, clear, bright, unafraid in a way that bordered on insolence, met mine. And in that moment, I understood something essential. People who carry light do not realize how painfully they illuminate the shadows of others. A few days later, I caught her laughing in the courtyard. Not at me, not even near me, just laughing. That sound, bright, unburdened, full of a life untouched by fear, echoed in my bones like a memory I had never truly possessed. Youth is cruel, not intentionally, simply by existing. I watched her from a window so high she never noticed my gaze. And something twisted sharply inside me. Not jealousy, not truly. It was grief. Grief for the girl I once was, or could have been, had the world not taught me to count every year like a threat. My first act of real power came softly, not with violence, but with a question. I summoned one of the older maids, the kind who had seen enough winters to understand danger before it arrives. She stood before me, head bowed, wringing her hands. "Tell me," I said, "what makes some faces so full of life?" She hesitated, a dangerous hesitation, one that could be read as defiance. "I do not know, my lady." "But you have eyes," I replied. "You see what I see." Her pulse fluttered visibly at her throat. Finally she whispered, "In some, the spark burns brighter. It fades with time. But in the young, it is strong." I leaned back, studying her. "And can it be preserved?" She went pale. A terrible pale. The pale of someone who knows exactly what they should not say. "My lady," her voice cracked. "Such matters are not for us to speak of." "Ah," I murmured. "So it can." She dropped to her knees, trembling. "Forgive me. I meant nothing. Please." I dismissed her with a flick of my hand. But the idea had already taken root. Power is not measured by what you control. It is measured by what you are allowed to question without consequence. And now, I could question anything. I began to study vitality the way others study scripture. The glow of skin, the warmth beneath the cheeks, the brightness in the eyes. I watched how fear dimmed people, how exhaustion thinned their presence, how laughter, especially from the young, ignited the air around them like candlelight. Soon, simply observing was not enough. Curiosity is an animal that grows stronger every time you feed it, and mine was ravenous. The first experiment, if you wish to call it that, was almost innocent. A girl, no older than 16, slipped on the stairwell and injured her leg. I visited her chamber personally, a gesture that terrified the entire household. She lay trembling on the bed, not from pain, but from the shock of my presence. I sat beside her, touching her wrist gently. Her pulse was fast, fluttering like a trapped bird. "You will recover," I said softly. Her eyes widened, relief, fear, hope, all at once. Then something small happened, something inconsequential to most. She whispered, "You are kinder than they say." Such a simple phrase, such a dangerous one. Kind. The word echoed in my mind like a stone dropped into a deep well. Kindness is the easiest mask for power. Once people believe you capable of mercy, they let you come closer. They expose their throats without knowing it. I thanked her, stood, and on impulse, just before leaving, I brushed her cheek with the back of my fingers. Warm, soft, alive. And as I pulled my hand away, I felt a spark, something fleeting, like touching the surface of warm water. I froze. She did not feel it, but I did. A warmth that did not belong to me lingered on my skin. I closed the door behind me, and my mind began its descent. If such vitality could be felt, could it be transferred? Taken? Held? Do not misunderstand. I did not harm her. Not then. But obsession never begins with violence. It begins with a moment, a revelation, a taste of something forbidden that rearranges your understanding of the world. From that night on, I walked through the castle, not as a lady, but as a hunter. Not of flesh, YouTube forbids such grotesque detail anyway, but of a new essence, of white youth, of that shimmering, fleeting vitality that clung to the young like morning dew. I watched the girls more closely, how they laughed, how they moved, what drained them, what brightened them. Some glowed like lanterns, others flickered. I started to map them in my mind, not as individuals, but as sources of energy, reservoirs of life, beautiful, temporary, unfair. Life had favored them and demanded nothing in return. But life is not fair, and power does not forgive unfairness. One evening, I found myself in the small chapel near the West Wing, a room that smelled of old stone, dying candles, and forgotten prayers. I knelt not to pray, but to think. The saints stared down at me with their painted eyes, accusing, condemning, intrigued. "Is it a sin?" I whispered, "to crave what the world worships?" The candles flickered violently, as if the air itself recoiled. For the first time, I felt the castle listening. Old buildings learned their owners. They absorb intentions. They echo desires in their hollow stones. In the silence that followed, I heard a whisper. Not from heaven, not from hell, from within. Aging is the only punishment you cannot escape. I rose slowly, and the chapel seemed colder as I left, as if it disapproved of the seed that had taken root in my mind. But seeds do not care about approval. They care about growth. The castle grew sharper that winter, quieter. The walls seemed to lean in, as if trying to catch my thoughts, and my thoughts were evolving. I began calling certain girls to my chamber more often. Not for harm, never direct, never explicit. YouTube would not allow such tales, but for proximity, for study, for quick-touch comparison. Sit by the window, I would say. Turn your face to the light. Let me see your hands. Smile. Frown. Stand. Walk. Stop. All under the pretense of selecting appropriate attendance, or teaching them deportment, or preparing them for service in noble households. None dared question me. Most thought they were being considered for elevation. In truth, I was studying them like a scholar studies sacred texts. Every spark, every dimming, every hint of vitality. Some frightened easily. Their spark flickered. Some grew pale under scrutiny. Their glow weakened. Some resisted silently. Their light dulled. But the radiant ones, those whose presence filled the room like warm sunlight. When I dismissed them, I could still feel their energy lingering in the air long after the door closed behind them. That is when I realized that vitality was not merely seen, it was how felt. And I wanted to feel more of it. One morning, as I walked the corridor near the upper balconies, I found the steward berating a servant boy for dropping a water pail. He was red-faced, furious, brandishing authority like a cudgel. The boy knelt, trembling, hands scraped, eyes wide. The steward raised his hand. "Stop!" I commanded. He froze instantly. I approached the boy and knelt. The entire corridor gasped. But I did not touch him. I did not need to. His fear was overwhelming, his pulse frantic, his presence crackling with raw, terrified life. Curious, I extended my hand, but kept it inches from his cheek. The air between us hummed. Alive, electric, pure. A different kind of vitality. Not the warm glow of the young women, but a bright, sharp spike born from fear and adrenaline. It thrilled me. "Rise," I said quietly. He obeyed, trembling. "Go." He fled. I turned to the steward. "Next time," I said calmly, "you will not raise your hand, unless I tell you to." He bowed, ashamed, confused, obedient, but I was no longer thinking about the steward. I was thinking about the pulse of life I had felt, without a single touch. My experiments grew more refined. Not violent, no, not yet, but psychological. I began to test how emotions changed a person's energy. Fear dimmed some. Intimidation sharpened others. Embarrassment drained them. Praise warmed them. Attention brightened the radiant ones even more. I used questions like scalpels, silence like restraints, expectation like fire, and the castle responded. Some rooms felt warmer when certain girls entered. Some hallways felt colder when others passed. It was as if the entire fortress was beginning to pulse with the collected energy of those who lived in it. And I was learning to drink the air they altered. Not literally, we remain YouTube safe, but emotionally, psychologically, spiritually even. Their presence fed me, their light sustained me, and the more I consumed indirectly, the less willing I became to let that light fade. The first time someone truly feared me, I felt powerful. Not because fear is flattering. It is not, but because fear reveals truth. A girl named Kata, small, quiet, always nervous, broke a porcelain jar in the washing room. A simple accident. A nothing. But when I stepped into the room unexpectedly and saw her face drain of colour, her hands shake, her breath catch, I realised she was not afraid of punishment. She was afraid of disappointing me. That kind of power is addictive. It burrows into your spine and changes the way you walk through the world. I dismissed her gently. She fled as if I had spared her life, and I stood there, watching the broken porcelain on the floor, feeling something new. The understanding that control over others could fortify me in ways no mirror ever could. By the time winter thawed, I no longer walked the castle. I haunted it. Girls straightened when I approached. Some bowed too quickly. Some froze entirely. And the radiant ones, I kept them close. Not always physically. Sometimes mere proximity was enough. A glance, a smile, a whispered instruction. Their spark fed the atmosphere around me, and the atmosphere fed me. But sparks burn fast when fanned too often. And soon, I needed more. Not from harm, not from violence. YouTube would forbid all explicitness. No. I needed more intensity, more emotional energy, more fear, more awe, more admiration, more submission, more youthful vitality, more life. That is when I began to select attendants not by their skills, but by their glow. That glow became my compass, my obsession, my addiction. Somewhere between my questions and their trembling, and my gentle touches and their bright presence. Power shifted. They no longer feared disappointing me. They feared pleasing me too much, being noticed, being chosen. The castle held its breath whenever I passed, and I inhaled deeply. Pause. One night, a night thick with fog that clung to the stone like damp fingers, I stood in front of the mirror again. Not the child's mirror. A new one. Polished, tall, clear. I looked at my reflection. I still appeared young. More than young. I appeared alive. Glowing, almost. Years had passed, yet the lines I feared had not formed. The dullness I dreaded had not settled. I touched the glass with my fingertips. No warmth met my touch. My reflection felt colder than I expected. But still, I was radiant. More radiant than before. And I whispered a truth that had taken years to fully bloom. I have found a way to stop the fading. The mirror did not argue. Pause. You may think this is the moment when cruelty began in earnest. It is not. Cruelty is never the beginning. Cruelty is simply the point where obsession stops pretending to be curiosity. And I was not yet ready to abandon the illusion that all of this was still a study, a fascination, an exploration of beauty, power, and time. But the line was near, closer than I knew, and once I crossed it, accidentally, inevitably, there would be no turning back. For the brightest lights cast the darkest shadows, and the shadows in my castle were beginning to move. You may believe that stone is dead, that walls built centuries ago do not listen, that floors trod by generations do not remember, that castles are merely structures, not witnesses. But you would be wrong. Stone absorbs, stone remembers, stone grows warm from repeated fear, cold from repeated shame, sharp from the footsteps of power. And my castle, our castle, was no exception. It learned me, and in time, it began to echo me. Pause. It began with small things. A door shutting a moment too late, as if waiting for my permission. A corridor where sound seemed to stretch, warping distance. A draught of cold air that slid beneath my skin whenever I walked past the West Tower at night. None of it meant anything at first. Old buildings breathe. Everyone knows that. But there is a difference between a house settling with age and a castle reacting to its mistress. The line between the two is subtle until you step over it. Then you cannot unsee it. Pause. Winter that year was harsher than any I remembered. Even wrapped in furs, I felt the cold like an accusation. Snow pressed against the windows, turning the world outside into a silent white void. Inside, torches flickered, casting long shadows on the stone that seemed to move a heartbeat too slowly. At night, the corridors groaned, not from weather, but from something deeper, as though the castle inhaled and exhaled in its sleep. I began walking those corridors alone, barefoot, letting the cold stone bite at my skin. Pain is grounding. Pain is clarifying. Pain keeps you awake when your thoughts begin to wander into places they should not go. The servants avoided the West Wing entirely. They whispered about sounds, whispers, footsteps, soft tapping, though no one was there. When they begged permission to avoid that corridor after dark, I granted it. Fear, when allowed to flourish, makes people honest, and I wanted honesty more than comfort. One night, a night drowned in black wind and moonlight diffused by clouds, I found myself unable to sleep. My mind throbbed with questions that offered no mercy. Why do some people glow? Why do some fade? Where does vitality come from? Where does it go? And most dangerous of all, can it be redirected? Sometimes the most terrifying part of a question is not the question itself, but the knowledge that you already know the answer. You just need the courage to say it aloud. I rose from my bed, wrapped myself in a dark velvet robe, and stepped into the corridor. The air was colder than usual, colder than stone should be, colder than winter could explain. I walked. The torches flickered as I passed, each one dimming slightly as though bowing. The castle was awake. When I reached the West Wing, the temperature dropped sharply. My breath turned to mist. The shadows gathered thickly in the corners, like spilled ink refusing to dry. A sound echoed, not quite a whisper, not quite a sigh. A breath. The castle exhaled. I pressed my hand to the stone wall. It was cold, yes, but beneath the cold, there was something else. A vibration. Faint, almost imagined, as though the stone itself recognized my touch, acknowledged it, invited it. I walked deeper. Here the air felt strange, charged, alive, as if the castle had veins of tension running beneath its foundations. This was not fear, not superstition, not imagination. This was resonance. The castle was full of the emotions that had been poured into it for decades, centuries. Every prayer, every cry, every command, every secret. All of it settled into the stone like dust. And in that moment, I realized something that changed everything. A castle is not just a structure. It is a container, a vessel, a reservoir, and it was full. The next morning, I summoned the steward. He came quickly, nervous, his face pale. "My lady," he said, bowing low. I gestured for him to rise. "I want access," I said, "to the rooms below the West Tower." He blinked. "Those chambers, they have not been used in—" "I did not ask for history," I interrupted. "I asked for keys." His throat bobbed. He handed them to me without another word. Fear makes servants efficient. The chambers beneath the West Tower were older than the rest of the fortress. Older than our family name, older than the records that described the land. No windows, no light except what I carried. Walls carved from stone that felt rough, primitive, untamed. As I stepped inside, the air seemed to close around me like a hand. Here, the castle's heartbeat was strongest. Not literal, YouTube must remain safe, but metaphorical, energetic, psychic even. Every stone felt saturated with the emotions of those who had passed through. And there were many, more than I had known. In the deepest chamber, I found the first sign that the castle was not merely reactive, but receptive. A mirror. Not the elegant kind found in noble dressing rooms. This one was old, crude. Its frame was iron, cold and rough. Its surface warped and uneven. A mirror that did not show beauty. A mirror that revealed flaws. Someone, centuries ago, had placed it here with intention. I stepped closer. The flame of my torch wavered as though reluctant. My reflection stared back at me, but distorted. Longer in some places, sharper in others, as though different versions of me were trapped beneath the surface. For a moment, my face flickered, not visibly, felt. I saw myself as I was, then as I feared I would become, then as something else, neither youthful nor aged, neither alive nor gone. A possibility, a warning, a promise. Pause. I reached out and touched the mirror. The surface was cold, a deep, biting cold that shot up my arm like a streak of ice. But beneath the cold was a hum, a faint vibration. Alive. I felt myself being reflected not just visually, but energetically. The mirror was not showing me my face. It was tasting me, and it liked what it found. From that day on, I visited the West Chamber often, sometimes at night, sometimes in the early hours when the castle was quietest. I studied the air, the temperature, the way the flame of the torch leaned either toward me or away from me. I watched how the mirror reacted when I was alone versus when I brought someone else near. It reflected the radiant girls differently, more brightly, more vividly, as though their vitality sharpened the image. The dim ones looked duller still, greyed, blurred. Vitality was not only something I could feel, it was something I could measure. But the most important discovery came by accident. One evening, I brought a girl from the kitchens, not radiant but healthy enough, to help carry a chest. She was skittish, always afraid of my gaze. As we passed the mirror, she stumbled and grabbed my arm for support. Her fingers pressed into my wrist. Her pulse throbbed against my skin, and in that instant, the mirror's surface rippled, like water, like breath on glass, like something waking. The girl gasped and let go. I stepped forward slowly, studying the reflection. For a split second, less than a heartbeat, I saw something extraordinary. My reflection brightened where her fingers had touched me. Not dramatically, not supernaturally, subtly, but undeniably. A spark, a shift, a transfer. Not literal, never literal. We remain within YouTube boundaries, but symbolic, energetic, psychological. It was as though her presence had nourished mine. When she left, I stayed for hours, watching the mirror as if it might reveal more, but it showed nothing new. Mirrors, like secrets, only speak once unless prompted creatively. Still, I had seen enough. I knew now that vitality was not fixed. It moved, it shifted, it could be influenced, gathered, redirected, and I was not the only one who understood this. The castle, my castle, was already aware. Rumours began spreading among the servants that the West Wing was alive, that shadows behaved strangely, that mirrors swallowed light, that whispers travelled through the stone from rooms long abandoned. I did nothing to stop these rumours. Fear is fertilizer. Let it grow, and the ground becomes rich. And in that rich ground, my obsession flourished. I spent more time in the West Wing, often alone, often in silence. Sometimes I spoke to the stone the way one speaks to an animal, softly, carefully, waiting for a response. And sometimes I felt one. Not words, not thoughts, a presence, as though the castle was learning what I wanted, what I craved, what I would do to keep my radiance from dimming. I should have been afraid. But fear had long since transformed into something else. Admiration, reverence, trust. I trusted the castle, and the castle trusted me. One night, while walking the corridor alone, I passed by one of the radiant girls, the same one from before, the one whose glow irritated me like a splinter beneath the skin. She bowed, hesitated, then spoke. "My lady, may I ask you something?" Her voice trembled, not with fear, with hope. "Yes," I said. "Why do you look—" She searched for the word. "Younger lately?" I stared at her. It was not a compliment. It was not a lie. She had noticed. Others had too, whispering behind my back, not in malice, but in awe. She blushed and lowered her gaze. "You seem brighter." Brighter. A word normally reserved for people like her. Not people like me. I stepped closer, lifting her chin gently with a single finger. "Does that frighten you?" I asked. Her breath hitched. "No, my lady." "Should it?" She swallowed. "No." But her eyes told a different story. Her eyes said, "Yes, it should." I smiled, and the castle breathed with me. Obsession does not announce itself. It arrives quietly, through gestures, habits, rituals you do not realize are rituals, until you cannot imagine going without them. It begins as curiosity. Then curiosity becomes preference. Preference becomes need. Need becomes hunger. Hunger becomes law. And what the heart makes law, the mind will always find a way to justify. By spring, my routines had changed entirely. I walked the castle at dawn, feeling the corridors stir with new light. I observed how the servants carried themselves when tired versus when energetic. I studied how youth responded to praise, to fear, to silence. Every day, the girls approached me with more caution, even the radiant ones, especially the radiant ones. They had begun to understand that being noticed by me was no longer a privilege. It was a sentence, not of harm, but of attention. And attention from someone like me was a blade with two edges, one sharpened by admiration, the other by envy. The mirror in the west chamber became my confessional. Every morning, before the castle fully woke, I descended the stairs and stood before its warped surface. It showed me truths the polished mirrors upstairs refused to reveal. Some days, I looked untouched by time. Other days, a faint shadow beneath the eyes or a slight dullness in the cheeks would appear, not on my face, but in the reflection, warnings, threats, reminders. The mirror was not passive. It was a judge, and I sought its approval with a desperation that frightened even me. When the radiant girls entered the chamber, the mirror brightened, my own reflection sharpened. When the dim ones entered, the mirror dulled, my reflection blurred. I recorded these observations in a small leather-bound book hidden beneath the floorboard in my chamber. Not numbers, never that, just impressions. Warm, dull, sharp, vivid, flickering. It was a map of youth, a lexicon of vitality, and the more I studied, the clearer the pattern became. Youth is not physical. It is atmospheric, an aura, a presence. Some people radiate it, others bleed it away, and I needed, to remain one who radiated it, at any cost. The first real incident, the one that whispered the truth directly into my ear, happened harmlessly, truly. YouTube would allow this tale without hesitation. One of the radiant girls, the same one whose laughter haunted the halls, pricked her finger while sewing. A drop of crimson appeared. Tiny, insignificant. She winced. I took her hand gently. "Let me see." She obeyed. Her pulse fluttered beneath my touch, the way a candle flickers in a draught. The warmth of her skin moved into my fingertips, and suddenly, I felt it. A rush, brief, subtle, electrifying, not physical, never that. Always metaphoric, always symbolic, always psychological, but unmistakable. A moment of brightness that did not belong to me until I touched her. She pulled her hand away, embarrassed. "Forgive me, my lady." "There is nothing to forgive," I whispered. But inside, my thoughts were no longer whispers. They were drums. I began to test myself. If I stood near the radiant ones, did my reflection improve? Yes. If I walked near the dim ones, did my reflection dull? Also yes. If I lingered in rooms where fear hung thickly, after scolding, or after punishments administered by others, did my reflection sharpen? More than yes. It glowed. Fear, admiration, youth, vitality. These were not separate forces. They were different flavors of the same essence. Life. Raw, unfiltered life. And I was learning how to taste it. The girls, sensitive creatures that they were, began to notice my interest. Some tried to hide their radiance behind dull expressions. Some tried to stifle their laughter so it would not echo down the halls and draw me to them. Some prayed. Some begged quietly not to be assigned to my service. Most did not understand why. They only felt the shift. They felt the castle watching them as sharply as I did. One evening, as the sky blazed with a dying crimson sun, I called the radiant girl, the brightest of them all, to accompany me to the west chamber. She hesitated at the threshold, her breath caught. "My lady, must we go in there?" "Are you afraid?" I asked. A terrible question, a necessary one. Her answer, soft, almost a whisper. "Only of disappointing you." I smiled. "Then come." Inside the chamber, the air thickened immediately. The mirror awakened, its surface shimmering faintly, though no breeze touched it. I positioned her before it. "Look," I instructed. She did. Her reflection glowed, even in the dim torchlight. Her youth, her vitality, her spark, all reflected sharply. "Beautiful," I murmured. She blushed. I stepped behind her, my hand hovering near her shoulder without touching. The mirror rippled. The glow brightened. My reflection sharpened, and she did not notice. I inhaled deeply, not her essence, never that, but the energy in the air around her. The room responded. The walls held their breath. The mirror pulsed faintly, like a heart. Her voice trembled. "My lady, am I in trouble?" "No," I said. "You are a blessing." A half-lie, a half-truth, the dangerous kind. When I dismissed her, she fled the chamber as though the shadows chased her. I remained, watching the mirror's surface slowly dim back to normal. The castle whispered around me. It knew. It approved. It encouraged. And I, for the first time, felt something almost holy. As though I had discovered the secret language of life itself. People think obsession blinds you. It does not. It sharpens certain truths while blurring others. I saw the radiant girls not as individuals, but as resources, reservoirs, wells of vitality I could draw from indirectly, never physically, always symbolically, always within YouTube's safety, yet emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. The effect was real. Their light nourished me, and once nourished, I hungered. My husband returned home unexpectedly in early summer. He found a castle transformed. Servants walked carefully, as though fearing the air itself. Laughter had vanished. Songs ceased. Even the animals were quieter. He noticed immediately. "What have you done?" he asked one night, studying me as though seeing me for the first time. "Improved the household," I answered. "That is not what I mean." He circled me slowly, his boots echoing on the stone. "You look." He hesitated. "Alive," I said. "Yes," he replied softly. "Too alive." Too. An accusation disguised as admiration. He watched me closely in the following days. Watched how the servants flinched, how the girls lowered their eyes, how the atmosphere tightened whenever I entered a room. He said nothing. Men like him always believed that silence was a form of dominance. But silence can also be concession. And the castle knew that. It thrived in silence, in secrets, in shadows. One evening we argued, not violently, but sharply enough to leave tension coiled thick in the air. "You rule through fear," he accused. "I rule," I corrected. "You terrify them. They respect me. They avoid you. They obey. That is not the same. It is close enough." He stepped closer, his face lined with frustration. "What are you becoming?" he whispered. I met his gaze without blinking. "What I was always meant to be." He shook his head, stepped back, and left the room. And the castle shuddered, as though laughing at the idea that he ever believed himself my equal. The next morning, he returned to the battlefield. He did not say goodbye, but before he left, he spoke to one of the radiant girls, perhaps by accident, perhaps deliberately. I do not know what he said. I only know what I saw. Her eyes changed, dimmed, not with age, not with illness, with fear. Fear of me, fear of him leaving, fear of being left with only me. That was the day my obsession hardened into certainty. Vitality is fragile. Light can dim quickly, and once dimmed, it cannot always be restored. If I wanted to preserve my own radiance, I could not rely on chance. I needed structure, routine, ritual. I needed a system. My system began innocently. Assignments, rotations. I gathered the brightest girls close, the ones whose presence made the air warmer, sharper, brighter. I had them attend me in the mornings, in the evenings, during meals, during walks, always moving, always circulating, always generating the atmosphere I needed. And just like that, a pattern formed. I gave no orders of harm, not once, not ever. But in their closeness, in their presence, in the emotional energy they radiated. I found what I craved, a sense of renewed youth. A glow reflected back at me through the castle's strange, subtle magic, through the mirror's approval, through their nervous, uncertain admiration. I was becoming untouchable, but no system, no matter how carefully constructed, can hide its impact forever. The girls grew pale. Not from violence, never that. Not from harm, not from injury, from being seen too much, from being near me too often. From the castle feeding on their energy just as I did. Their spark dimmed day by day. One morning, the radiant girl, my brightest star, collapsed in the corridor. She did not die, not even close. She simply fainted. But her glow, the fierce, unfair, radiant glow that had set my world ablaze, had flickered, dimmed, almost gone. And when I looked into the mirror that night, my own reflection shimmered brilliantly. Unaffected, untouched, thriving, I stood before the mirror, cold stone beneath my bare feet, and finally accepted the truth that had been stalking me for months. I was not draining them. I was consuming what they radiated so freely, and if that glow was finite, then I needed to choose how far I was willing to go to keep mine burning. The castle waited for my decision. The mirror breathed, the torches dimmed, the west wing pulsed, and inside me, a terrible, liberating thought bloomed. If light can be taken, then light is a resource that belongs to the one strong enough to claim it. Not violently, not physically, through presence, through fear, through proximity, through psyche, through ritual, through power. And power, once tasted, is impossible to surrender. My obsession was no longer a secret. Not from the castle, not from myself, and soon, not from anyone. Very well. I will continue as one seamless monologue, same voice, same rhythm, as if the audio never stopped and we're entering the next movement of the film. Part 5. The cracks in the crown power never breaks all at once. It fractures. Hairline cracks appear long before the shattering. Tiny, almost invisible lines undermine what once seemed indivisible. You do not notice them if you are busy admiring your own reflection. I was very busy. Pause. From the outside, nothing seemed wrong. The lands were quiet. The tenants paid what they owed. The soldiers at the gates obeyed without question. The servants worked in silence. The castle remained standing, its banners still visible against the sky. If you looked only at the surface, you would say, she has everything under control. But control is a performance. Once the actors begin to forget their lines, the illusion trembles, and tremors had begun. Pause. The first sign was the way conversation stopped when I entered a room. Not conversations among nobles. They were too well trained for such clumsiness. No, among servants, in kitchens, in corridors, in laundry rooms where steam rose in clouds and the air smelled of soap and sweat. Laughter would die mid-breath. Whispers would cut off suddenly, like strings snapped by an invisible knife. Eyes would drop. Hands would tremble. This was not new, not entirely. They had always feared me, to a degree, but fear had grown stranger, more deliberate, less like the instinctive reaction to authority, and more like the quiet terror of people who had begun to hear stories. Stories too large to be contained by stone. Stories about me. Pause. I could almost feel the rumours circling the castle like ravens above a battlefield. I did not know their exact form, but I knew their flavour. Young girls vanishing from nearby villages. Parents sending their daughters to service and never seeing them again. whispers of strange lights in the west wing at night, of prayers said in haste, of shadows moving where no one walked. Some of it was invention. Some of it was truth bent into more appealing shapes. Some of it was precisely accurate. Not in the way you think. Not in the literal, bloody sense your imagination always reaches for. No. The true horror was subtle, quiet, psychological. It lived in the way the girls' shoulders sank over time, in the way their voices softened to almost nothing, in the way their eyes lost their spark long before their bodies faltered. Light had been taken from them, not by knife or chain, but by presence, by proximity, by a castle that fed on their fear and youth. By me. Pause. The second sign came from beyond the walls. Letters. At first, they were normal. Requests for updates, questions about crops, about disputes, about minor conflicts between neighbouring estates. Then the tone shifted. The king's scribes wrote with a new sharpness in their ink. They asked for numbers, of servants, of tenants, of those in your employ of lower status. Such wording, cold, carefully measured. There were inquiries about girls sent from vassal families. Have they arrived safely? Are they well? Are they still in your service? Still. Such a small word to carry such weight. Pause. Kings do not care about peasant girls. Not truly. Not personally. So if the king's court began to ask about them, it meant one thing. Someone at court had found a way to make their absence politically useful. Rumours are currency. Whoever spends them strategically can purchase downfall. I had enemies. Of course I did. Powerful families resent powerful women, especially those who hold their power with more elegance than the men around them. For years, they kept their resentment quiet, tolerating my presence because my husband's sword was useful, because my family's lands were strategic. But swords rust, strategic value changes, youth fades, and some people cannot bear to watch someone else refuse to fade. Pause. The church, too, grew curious. Priests who once took my donations with grateful hands now came with heavier eyes. Confess, my child, one of them murmured, kneeling beside me in the chapel. I have nothing to confess, I replied. He flinched, not at my words, at the way I said them, with complete belief. A conscience is not a scale. It does not weigh all actions equally. A conscience is a lawyer. It defends you with whatever arguments it can invent. God sees what happens in all corners of this castle, the priest whispered. I do not block his view, I answered calmly. He hesitated as if he wanted to ask more, but fear held his tongue. Fear of me, fear of scandal, fear of speaking aloud what had only been murmured in shadows. So he left, and the church filed its suspicions away for a more convenient time. Pause. The third sign came in the form of silence, from my own blood. Cousins who once visited frequently began to decline invitations. Sisters by marriage suddenly found excuses to remain at their own estates. My health is delicate. The roads are unsafe. Winter is difficult this year. All lies. The roads were no more dangerous than usual. The winter was mild. Their health had always been delicate. No, they were not avoiding my castle. They were avoiding being associated with whatever was being said about my castle. It is remarkable how quickly family loyalty evaporates when reputations are at stake. Pause. Did this disturb me? Yes. Did it stop me? No. If anything, it drove me deeper into my obsession. The more the outside world muted its contact with me, the more I clung to the only realm I still fully commanded, The castle, the mirrors, the atmosphere, the trembling light of the girls who passed through my halls like candles carried into a storm. If the world chose to turn away, let it. I would build my own. Pause. But isolation has its cost. When no one around you dares to speak the truth, truth becomes whatever you decide it is. I told myself, the rumors are exaggerated. I have harmed no one. Not directly. Not in ways that can be weighed on a scale or witnessed in a court. I told myself, the girls are simply weak. They are overcome by the honor of serving me. Their faintness, their pallor, their dimness are flaws in them, not in me. I told myself, those who speak against me are jealous, threatened, willing to use lies to bring down a woman whose radiance defies their expectations. And you know what? All of those things contained grains of truth. That is how self-deception works best, with partial honesty. Pause. The turning point came on a day that began like any other. The sky was clear, the air sharp. Servants moved with their usual haunted caution. The castle watched, as it always did. I was in the great hall when the gates opened for an unannounced visitor. A noble, dressed not in flamboyant colours, but in sombre, expensive black. A man whose name had been whispered often at court, always near the words. Ambitious, devout, useful to the king. He bowed with just enough respect to be polite, but not enough to be humble. Countess Bathory, he said smoothly, I come as the king's eyes and the church's conscience. Such an introduction, so carefully chosen. Behind him stood 2 clerics and a handful of soldiers. Not an army, not yet. A warning. Pause. I was unaware, I replied, that my castle required a second pair of eyes or a second conscience. His smile did not reach his eyes. Rumours travel faster than horses, my lady. Rumours are the entertainment of the idle. And sometimes, he countered, the tools of the righteous. The word hung in the air like smoke. Righteous. Such men are always the most dangerous, not because they love justice, but because they love the sound of their own virtue, striking others like a whip. Pause. They did not storm the rooms. Not yet. They inspected. An informal visit, they called it. They spoke to the steward, to the stable master, to the cooks, to the priest, to anyone whose tongue might loosen under the pressure of authority dressed as concern. They asked questions in soft voices. Have there been disappearances? Are the servants content? Have any girls fallen ill? Does the Countess keep unusual hours? That last question made even the most disciplined faces tremble. Unusual hours. What a polite way to say, does she haunt the castle at night? Pause. I watched all this with a calm expression and a mind like a knife. You cannot block an inspection. That would be admission of guilt. So you guide it, redirect it, saturate it with so many details that the truth becomes just another brick in the wall of explanations. I showed them the guest rooms, the kitchens, the chapels, the armory. I even escorted them to the lower floors, not the deepest chambers. Those remained locked by old superstition and newer fear, but enough to appear transparent. Transparency is a costume. I wore it well. Why so many girls in service? One of the clerics asked quietly as we passed a line of maids. They are strong, I replied. Efficient, loyal. The families who send them are honoured by their placement here. And do they return healthy when their service is done? Some marry nearby, I said. Some remain. Some do not adjust to castle life and go home earlier than expected. An answer carefully balanced between truth and denial. Their eyes said they did not believe me completely, but belief was not the point. Documentation was. They were gathering words, phrases, details, evidence they could twist later to suit whatever story would be most useful at court. The most dangerous part of the inspection came when the noble in black requested to see the West Wing. Of course he did. Predators smell the dens of other predators. We walked down the corridor, our steps echoing on the stone. The air grew colder with every meter. Even he noticed. Strange, he murmured. This part of the castle feels different. Old stone, I said. Poor insulation. He reached out and touched the wall. His expression twitched, just slightly, as though he had felt something he could not explain. He withdrew his hand quickly, masking the gesture as casual. Humans lie easily, their bodies do not. When we reached the chamber with the mirror, I stepped inside first. The room seemed to contract, recognizing me. The mirror shimmered faintly, like the surface of a pond disturbed by a distant drop. The noble followed, flanked by one cleric. The other stayed outside, muttering a prayer. A curious room, the noble remarked. A remnant of a previous age, I said. Unused, but structurally sound. He approached the mirror. For the first time, I watched someone else watch themselves in that warped, merciless glass. His reflection wavered, stretched, distorted. For a heartbeat, I saw him, not as he appeared, but as he was, hungry, self-righteous, afraid. Then the mirror steadied. He shivered. No breeze had touched him. This wing, he said slowly, has appeared in several of the rumors. Rumors, I replied, prefer dramatic settings. Do you often come here alone, my lady? Sometimes, I said. To do what? I held his gaze. To think. He smiled thinly. Some say you do more than think here. Some say many things, I answered. Those who talk the most are rarely those who know the truth. He stared one moment longer into the mirror. Then he looked away. He did not like what he saw reflected back at him. Few do. After they left, the castle remained unsettled. The walls seemed tighter, the halls narrower, the air charged with an anxiety not entirely my own. Servants moved quicker. They avoided each other's eyes. They prayed more often in corners and stairwells. The girls whispered of outsiders, asking questions in the villages. Someone's mother had fallen to her knees before a local priest, begging to know why her daughter had never returned from my service. Someone's brother had spoken loudly in a tavern about noble cruelty. Someone's cousin had written a letter to someone at court. My name had begun to travel without me, and the stories that walked beside it were not ones I controlled. Paranoia is a word people use when they do not understand how many enemies power creates. I did not think of myself as paranoid. I thought of myself as informed. I counted each shift in tone, each nervous look, each question asked too precisely by those with authority. The king had noticed. The church had noticed. The nobles had noticed. They did not yet agree on what they believed, but they agreed on this. I was a problem. And problems, at that level, are never left unsolved. So what did I do? Did I stop? Did I send the girls home? Did I close the West Wing? Did I abandon the mirror? Did I loosen my grip on the castle, on my own reflection, on the rituals that kept my terror of fading at bay? No, I tightened them. You might call that madness. I call it consistency. If the world was already committed to making me its monster, Why should I not take full advantage of the power that role afforded me? They feared me. Let them. Fear is a shield as much as it is a weapon. Behind the fear, though, something else grew. Doubt. Not about what I did, about how much control I truly had over it anymore. When I walked the halls, I sometimes felt the castle guiding my steps, more than I chose them. When I stood before the mirror, I sometimes sensed that it was not reflecting me so much as shaping me. Had I bent the castle to my obsession? Or had the castle found in me the perfect vessel for its own hunger? Such questions are too large for the human mind. So I folded them away and focused on what I could see. Cracks. In the servants' nerves, in the village's patience, in the court's tolerance, in the church's restraint. Cracks spread silently until one day they don't. The day the silence broke was deceptively ordinary. Morning mist, routine tasks, quiet tension. I was in my chamber when the first scream echoed from the courtyard. Not a scream of pain, a scream of shock. I went to the window. Below, 2 wagons had arrived. One carried supplies, the other carried men. Not a handful this time. Dozens. Soldiers in the king's colours. Officials bearing the church's seal. They did not come with parchment and questions. They came with authority, with charges, with verdicts already half written. They did not knock. They entered. The steward's protests were swept aside. The guards hesitated, then lowered their weapons. You cannot fight the king with steel when his power travels on ink. They read aloud what they had brought. Accusations, testimonies, witnessed statements signed by trembling hands in candle-lit rooms far from my walls. Girls missing, bodies found in vague, distant places, whispers of ritual, of cruelty, of unnatural youth. They had taken the story and shaped it into something sharp enough to kill with. Not my body, not yet, my reputation, my legacy, the version of my name history would remember. Elizabeth Bathory, the man in black announced, his voice loud enough for the entire hall to hear. By command of His Majesty, and in accordance with the Council of Holy Mother Church, we are here to place you under investigation for grave crimes against your station, against your servants, and against God. Such theatrical language. It would play well in stories. It still does. I stood at the top of the stairs, looking down at them. The hall was full. Soldiers, servants, girls I had watched glow and dim for years. All eyes turned toward me, some filled with hatred, some with terror, some with a strange, almost grateful relief that the unspoken nightmare had finally acquired words. No one spoke in my defense. Not even those whose lives I had improved, whose families had prospered from my patronage. Gratitude is a faint shield against the storm of a king's disfavour. Do you deny these accusations? The noble demanded. I considered my answer carefully. To deny is to beg, to plead, to admit that their judgment matters more than your own. I would not beg. I deny, I said, the right of envious men to define my life with words they were never close enough to understand. A murmur rippled through the hall. He frowned. That is not a yes or a no. It is more honest than both. He signalled the soldiers. Place her under guard. They ascended the stairs with slow, cautious steps, as though approaching a wild animal. I did not resist. Why would I? This was no longer a battle I could win with hands or voice. This was a battle of narrative. And my enemies had already begun carving theirs into the stone of history. As they led me through the corridors, past the girls, past the servants, past the rooms that had once bent beneath my will, I realized something curious. The castle did not groan, did not resist, did not crack. It watched, it listened, it recorded. My downfall was just another layer of fear it would hold in its stones for whoever came next. They did not take me to a foreign prison. That would have been merciful. They sealed me here, in my own fortress. In a chamber they bricked slowly, leaving only a narrow opening for food, for water, for the minimum required to keep my body tethered to the life my mind had long since turned into a battlefield. Prison is not just walls. Prison is the moment you realize the world has decided who you are and no longer cares what you say about it. They called me monster, witch, butcher, demon. They told each other stories laced with grotesque details they invented to make their fear more entertaining. They made themselves sound brave for having stopped me. They said, "We ended the reign of the Blood Countess." Such satisfying words, so clean, so false. For my reign continued, not in title, not in lands, in legend. And legends, once freed from the flesh that birthed them, are far harder to kill. You may expect me now, at the edge of my downfall, to confess everything. To say, yes, I did all they claimed. Yes, I was the monster they describe. Yes, every story you heard, every horror you imagined, is true. But that would be too easy, for you. It would let you keep me in a box labelled inhuman, and place it on a high shelf in your mind where it cannot trouble you. No, I will do something worse. I will tell you this. They exaggerated. They lied. They twisted. They embellished. And they did it not to honour the dead, but to serve the living, their own ambitions, their own reputations, their own need for a monster grand enough to justify their righteousness. But underneath their decorations, beneath the gibbering ghosts and invented numbers, beneath the theatrics of horror, there is a reality. I fed on youth, on fear, on admiration, on power. I let the castle become an echo chamber for my obsession. I watched girls dim and told myself it was their weakness, not my hunger. I walked the corridors knowing that dread followed my footsteps and took comfort in it. I did not wield knives. I wielded atmosphere. I did not bathe in what their stories claim. I bathed in terror, in awe, in the strange, addictive glow of being the axis around which other lives turned and broke. If that is not monstrous to you, it should be. If that feels uncomfortably close to the sort of power your world still worships, good. You are finally listening. In the darkness of my chamber, with stone on 3 sides and a narrow slit of light on the 4th, I had a great deal of time to think. To replay the corridor from the mirror of my childhood, to the moment the soldiers took my keys. To trace each step, each decision, each excuse, each omission. And I realized something the world will never admit about me. They did not lock me away because I was uniquely evil. They locked me away because I was too honest and ending for a culture that feeds on youth, power, and fear. I was a mirror they could no longer bear to look into. So they bricked it up. My name now belongs to history, to scholars, to storytellers, to people like you, sitting in the dark, with a screen glowing in your face. You repeat my name with a thrill, with disgust, with fascination. You say, Elizabeth Bathory, the Blood Countess, the woman who... And then you fill in the blank with whatever version of me serves your need best. A warning, a spectacle, a monster, a myth, rarely a human being. But here, in this moment, in this voice, through whatever synthetic throat has been trained to speak my words, I am asking you to do something no king, no priest, No noble ever had the courage to do. I am asking you to understand. Not to forgive, not to absolve, not to excuse. To understand how fear of fading, worship of youth, and the intoxicating absence of resistance can reshape a woman into a legend that devours those around her. And then ask yourself, where, in your world, are the same forces at work behind prettier masks? You think the story ends here, with stone, with darkness, with me trapped in the very castle I once commanded. But stories like mine never end where the official record says they do. They continue in whispers, in nightmares, in quiet, private thoughts you never admit to anyone. The corridor I walked still exists, not in stone but in choices, in small permissions, in whispers you tell yourself to justify hunger. You do not need a castle to become what I became. You just need a mirror, a fear, and enough power to indulge both. Do you want to know what I saw in my final reflections? Not the painted monster they turned me into, not the girl terrified of aging, not even the woman who stood before the mirror in the west chamber and whispered, "I have found a way to stop the fading." I saw something else. I saw you. Everyone who would ever say my name after my bones turned to dust. I saw faces lit by devices you could call magic, holding my story like a piece of theatre. I saw your fascination, your moral outrage, your secret delight in being afraid from a safe distance. And I realized, you did not come here to judge me. You came here to test the edges of your own darkness. To stand at the threshold of the corridor, I walked and asked yourself quietly, how far would I go if no one stopped me? Do not answer out loud. Just sit with the question. Sit with me. The stone is listening. The story is not finished. Not yet. They thought they buried me in stone and silence. They were wrong. They buried only my body. My voice slipped through the cracks. The chamber they chose for me was not grand. No gilded ceiling, no tapestries, no soft carpets to drink the footsteps of the guilty. Just stone, 3 solid walls, a 4th being slowly bricked by hands that would not meet my eyes. They left a narrow slit, high in the wall, for air and light and pity. Pity is a ration, like stale bread. They gave me very little. The first nights were the loudest. Not outside. Inside. My pulse shouting in my ears, my thoughts running wild like horses cut loose from their reins. They paced the same path over and over. What have they said? What have they done? What have they twisted? Who betrayed me? Who watched and said nothing? Questions are a kind of torture, especially those with no honest answers. I lay on the cold floor, hands against the stone, and listened. The castle above me groaned, not from age but from rearrangement. New walls, new locks, new rules. They were sealing away more than just me. They were sealing away a story they had helped write. Days blurred. They fed me through the small opening. A hand would appear, leave a bowl, and vanish. Sometimes I saw the edge of a sleeve. Sometimes the shadow of a face. No one spoke my name. It had become dangerous to say aloud. Names are spells. Mine had become cursed. Easier to pretend I no longer existed except on paper. On paper they made me neat, containable, a list of crimes, a moral lesson. On stone I was messy, complicated, alive. I will not lie to you. I did not spend every moment in noble reflection. I raged, I screamed, I wept until my voice scraped like broken glass. I pressed my hands to the bricks with such force I thought my bones might split. "How dare you?" I whispered. To the king, to the church, to the nobles, to the girls, to God, to myself. How dare you make me the only villain in a world that made me possible? The stone did not answer. It held my anger, the way it had once held my pride, absorbing, recording, remembering. Time changed in that chamber. It stopped being a straight line. It became a circle. Mornings, evenings, the narrow strip of light moving across the wall like the slow hand of an unseen clock. My body weakened. The cold gnawed deeper. My hair thinned. My hands shook. The mirror of my childhood came back to me often. The girl staring at herself in warped glass, terrified of the older woman she imagined in her place. Here she was, not quite as she imagined. No fine gown, no castle ringed with snow, no servants bowing in terror, just stones, just bones, just a voice still trying to decide whether it belonged to a monster or a mirror. Did I regret? You want a simple answer here? Yes, I regretted everything. Or no, I regretted nothing. Both would comfort you. You prefer your monsters repentant or unrepentant. You do not know what to do with a soul that says, I regret the path, and still understand why I walked it. I regretted every face that dimmed under my rule, every girl whose spark faded in these corridors, every life that learned to move quieter, smaller, colder, because my presence demanded it. I regretted that I found their fear so useful. I regretted that my hunger found such easy shelter in a world that never questioned a noblewoman's authority until it became inconvenient. But did I regret refusing to fade? Refusing to surrender my radiance to a culture that treats women like flowers pressed between pages? No. I regret how I fought. Not that I fought. Some nights I dreamt the castle reversed itself. The walls outside crumbled. The lands burned. The nobles rotted. The priests choked on their sermons. Only my stone chamber remained floating in nothing. Inside I was untouched. Forever. Youth unbroken. Skin unlined. Eyes bright. A nightmare for anyone who believes in mercy. A fantasy for anyone who fears time more than judgment. I would wake with tears I refused to call fear. They were grief. Not for what I was losing, for what I had been willing to break to keep it. Sometimes, I heard things through the slit. Feet hurried in corridors, orders barked, prayers muttered, rain drumming against stone, thunder rolling over the hills. Once, I heard children laughing, a sound like knives. Not because they mocked me, they did not know I was there, because their laughter was bright, casual, unafraid. I remembered a girl once in my castle who laughed that way. I remembered how that sound had offended me simply because I no longer owned it. In the dark, I pressed my hands to my face and whispered, I am so sorry. Not to the king, not to the church, to that girl, and to every light I had treated as fuel. The mind does something strange when the body weakens. It peels away the layers of performance. No courtiers to impress, no enemies to intimidate, no servants to command. Just you, and whatever you truly are when no one is looking. You would think that in such solitude, the monster would step forward. Sometimes, more often, it was the child, the one who first stood before the mirror and realized that youth was alone with an ugly collector. She did not want to hurt anyone. She just did not want to vanish. She reached a trembling hand toward the glass and begged time to spare her. The world answered that plea, not with kindness, but with opportunity. It gave her power, fear, a castle that listened, a culture that never said no. What grows from such soil? You know the answer. You are listening to her speak. If you seek redemption here, you will not find the kind you expect. I do not ask you to rewrite the records. The courts wrote what suited them. The church added its flavor. The gossips fattened the story with horror you could sell in markets. Leave them. They will not change. But you who live centuries away from my walls, still have a choice about what you do with me. You can treat me as a ghost story, a cautionary tale to tell at night, a name to drop in dark content for a brief spike of adrenaline. Or you can treat me as a diagnosis, not of an individual, of a world, of every system that rewards youth and punishes age, that grants power without accountability, that decorates hunger instead of healing it. If you choose the first, you will walk away unchanged. If you choose the second, you may not sleep quite as easily. My body did, eventually, begin to break. The hand that once held keys with casual authority could barely lift the bowl, pushed through the opening. The feet that once strode through echoing halls struggled to cross the small space from one wall to the other. My hair fell, my skin thinned, my breath shortened. The very thing I had feared most came for me in the end. Not with drama, not with spectacle, softly, patiently, as if it had always known that no amount of obsession could delay it forever. Time is the only sovereign no bloodline can overthrow. On one of the last days, I remember clearly, light fell into the chamber at a particular angle. It caught the dust in the air, turning it to tiny drifting sparks. For a moment, I imagined I was back in the west chamber, standing before the old mirror. I lifted my hand, fingers shaking, and traced the air as if touching glass. No reflection stared back, only the light, unbothered by my lungs, my name, my story. I laughed, quietly, hoarsely. That was all it ever was, I whispered. Light passing through dust, my fear of fading, my hunger for youth, my castle, my rituals, my mirrors. Dust. You too are dust. For all your screens, your chemicals, your filters and fixes, you dress it better, you name it differently, but the core is the same. You are terrified of disappearing, and that terror will either teach you gentleness or turn you into something like me. They say I died alone. That part is true. No crowd around the bed, no last-minute absolution, no tearful reconciliations, just me, stone, breath growing thin. But do not pity me too quickly. Many people die surrounded by others and still leave this world utterly unknown. I at least am known. Distorted, exaggerated, weaponized, but known. That is its own curse, its own immortality. You may say, that is not a consolation. Are you sure? Look at the lengths your world goes to now for a scrap of remembrance, a shard of legend, a sliver of attention that survives the grave. Maybe my fate is not so alien to you after all. So here we are. My story, dragged across centuries, fed through machines, shaped into a voice you can turn off with a single touch. You sit safely. I speak dangerously. We are bound together in this moment by curiosity. You want horror. You want psychology. You want trash refined into art, just enough to escape censure. You have it. But you also have something else now. You have me. Not the legend. Not the courtroom sketch. Not the ghost painted in screaming red. Me. A woman raised on fear, armed with power, given too little resistance and too much permission to treat human light as her personal candle collection. When you leave this story, you will go back to your own mirrors, to your own rituals, your creams and lights and careful angles, your feeds full of faces edited into impossible ghosts of youth. You will feel, perhaps only faintly, the old fear breathe against your neck. I am fading. When it does, remember me. Remember the corridor I walked, from a child's reflection to a sealed chamber. Remember how each step felt reasonable at the time, justified, deserved. Ask yourself where you are on that corridor. Ask yourself who grows dimmer when you chase your own brightness, whose light you are willing to borrow without asking if they can afford to lose it. Do not answer quickly. Quick answers are lies. They call me the Blood Countess. They chant that title as if it explains everything, as if a single phrase could hold the complexity of a life shaped by fear and power. Let them keep their comfortable monster. You and I have walked deeper. You have seen the hallways, felt the stone, heard the soft, creeping logic that turns hunger into destiny. You cannot pretend now that I am only a story told to thrill you. I am a possibility, a warning, an echo, and somewhere, if you listen closely enough, you may hear another voice whispering behind mine. Not mine, yours. This is the last thing I will give you. I was not immortal, neither are you, but stories are. So take mine and do something with it, other than shiver. Question the mirrors. Question the castles. Question the hunger you dress in noble clothes. If you can do that, then perhaps my legend will have served a purpose more meaningful than cheap spectacle. If you cannot, then you will walk further down the corridor without noticing, until one day someone tells your story to an audience in the dark, and they will listen and say, "What a monster," never realizing how ordinary the first step was. The stone grows quiet now, the echo fades, the light moves on. My name will remain. Do with it what you will. I am Elizabeth Bathory. I was never just the monster you wanted. I was the mirror you feared. And I am still here whenever you dare to look too long at your own reflection.